Okay, welcome everyone. It is Wednesday, June 2nd at 6:30. This is a special select board meeting. And I will now begin with the remote public meeting script. As chair of the Norwich Select Board, I find that due to the state of emergency declared by Governor Scott as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and pursuant to Addendum 6 to Executive Order 0120 and Act 92, this public body is authorized to meet electronically. In accordance with Act 92, there is no physical location to observe and listen contemporaneously to this meeting. However, in accordance with the temporary amendments to the open meeting law, I can confirm that we have provided public access to the meeting by Zoom with additional access offered through telephone. We're using Zoom for this remote meeting. All members of the public have the ability to communicate with each other contemporaneously. Ooh, I'm admitting everyone, sorry. During this meeting through Zoom, and the public has access to contemporary listen and, if desired, participate in this meeting by going to the bottom of your screen and using the raise your hand button if you're participating via Zoom, or if by phone, please press *9, and then when invited to speak, please press *6 to unmute yourself. We provided public notice of instructions for accessing this meeting, and we've given notice to the public of the information for accessing this meeting, and we have provided a telephone number to alert the public body if there's any issues with access, and votes will be done by roll call if they are not unanimous. I think that's it. I'm looking forward to not saying that script one day. Okay. First item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda.
I move to approve the agenda.
Okay, go ahead. Is there a second? Let's take a second. Okay, made by Mary, seconded by Marcia. Herb, you raised your hand. You have a discussion point?
I just want to point out that though you don't see Miranda here, she will be doing the minutes for you folks. That's why I was glad to hear it's being recorded. So even though you don't see her, you'll still have the normal set of minutes.
Great. Thanks, Herb. Okay. All in favor of the agenda, please raise your hand. Okay, great. We'll take public comment for items not on the agenda, a little atypical for a special meeting, but we're here. Okay, I'm not seeing any public comment for items that are not on the agenda. And then I would like to move on to, I think the next is the VTrans, the Beaver Meadow sidewalk scoping discussion and the grant approval. So let me just sort of try to briefly summarize the latest, and then I'm going to turn it over to Herb, actually. So not so much the latest, so much as why we're talking about it today at a special meeting. So June 4th was the deadline for this grant, and it was left off of our last meeting's agenda just accidentally. I had neglected to include it. Herb had alerted me previously in email, and I'm making the agenda in his absence. It didn't have the benefit of having him check my work, so to speak, and have him weigh in. So I wrote to the board and had asked, we reminded folks that we have the ability to add items onto the agenda at the start of a meeting, and that we also have the ability to warn a special meeting. It was at that point that at least board members through the agenda setting process alerted me to some discrepancies in what was discussed on that February 24th meeting, which I've had Miranda include the notes for in the packet, and where we are with this grant application. So with that in mind, Herb, can I turn it over to you to talk about what those discrepancies are and sort of where we are with your recommendation on this grant?
Yeah, so the nutshell in this whole thing is that the project has always been kind of thought of in more of a three-phase project. One is the scoping, which we've already completed over the past year. Number two was to apply for a grant to proceed forward. And this was based on where your last action was, what, back in the February, maybe January, February timeframe, to proceed with an application that would be focused on the engineering, final engineering, right-of-way type of things, but not construction. And then phase 3 would be the construction. I was not aware that you cannot separate a phase 2 from a phase 3 from that standpoint, in terms of once you go for the big money pot, in other words, the scoping money usually comes from a smaller pot of money, even though it's from the same program. But once you start going for the bigger pot of money, such as the engineering and all that, basically the state is interpreting that you are making a commitment to move forward toward the construction. So for them, the state, it doesn't make sense to have a separation of phases 2 and 3. So when we were putting stuff together, I was not fully aware of this. And that's why the whole process has been orchestrated to have 3 separate phases. So as Rita was putting together the application, she knew this. I think that there was with misunderstanding on my part on the whole thing. So she put it together appropriately. But when I started to question stuff to say, well, no, that's not the way that we're supposed to do it. And with further checking with the state, we can't separate the 2. So my recommendation.
Can you just, who is Rita for the members of the
Oh,
public?
Rita Cito is the transportation planner from the Two Rivers Ottaquechee Regional Commission, and is an extremely knowledgeable person with regard to transportation. And she's very successful at getting grants for all communities in our region. And so consulting with her, that's when I found out yesterday that we can't separate the 2. So from my general recommendation is tonight is to say, don't put an application in. It's not my recommendation at this point, as much as I know there's favorability to move forward with at least a phase 2. That's not the way it's been sold to you. That's not the way it's been talked to the public at large. And the whole idea was to move forward with a phase 2. Where does that basically leave you in terms of my recommendation is that there's basically 4 different areas where I think, people like Peter Orner and the neighbors can continue to participate in the processes. It does not jeopardize an application in the future by not moving forward tonight. That's the important thing to understand, okay? The scoping work has been done. It's not unusual to take a year off to do some other stuff before you put an application on in the future, so that the state of Vermont doesn't freak out on something like this having a gap year. But this town has, basically, in order to move forward, this town has to decide to commit to doing the project in its entirety, including construction. And I know you're not ready for that. And that's why my recommendation is not to move forward at this time. So the issue is, so even I thought about the issue, well, what if we went forward with the application that had the combined phases 2 and 3, we go through phase 2, and then we go through another iterative process to decide to continue forward. In other words, we would sort of like with the RRFD, we decide not to take the grant for the phase 3. Well, what happens is, for those of you that were on the board, you remember Church Street? The Church Street sidewalk scenario comes into play, that any state funds that were expended toward the phase 2 project, we would have to pay back to the state. So this is why my recommendation comes up that we don't even move forward, because we're just going to do a Church Street project thing again. And I've said from the start, in trying to establish this whole process, I'm not going to repeat the Church Street situation. So the 4 things that I think are still available, that you still have to go through per se are: 1, you have a sidewalk inventory that's going to be updated that will reestablish the status of existing condition sidewalks. It can also be used it will have the priority of what needs to be worked on the best and all that. You can also use that inventory to establish where there may be gaps in the system, such as a gap in the Huntley Meadow Loop, which the Beaver Meadow Road sidewalk is intended to help close. So that's one area that there can be a level of participation in. Obviously, the capital budget and program is currently being worked on. The sidewalk inventory is going to play into that. as are additional discussions with regard to capital projects, which can include sidewalk-related information. The third is obviously there's an upcoming budget process. That's the logical time frame to begin to include talking about whether you want to move forward with a construction-related project. And then the fourth thing, which can be done either in collaboration with the board or can be done separately, and that is to have a special article at town meeting in March of 2022. So either the select board could have a special article that they would put on themselves, or some people could petition to have that project completed with whatever would be the amount of money that we need to cover the local match should a grant be awarded. So those are sort of the four things that remain out there that are still critical phases or pieces of this whole component project that can affect sidewalks, that does not belittle the Beaver Meadow Road sidewalk project, but actually would add to it. The problem that we just run into is that we cannot go forward with just a phase 2 application alone. And I know that everything was sold, especially to the select board, including by me, is that we would be applying just for a phase 2 related stuff. So in good faith, I cannot sit here and recommend to the board that we move forward with a combined application that includes construction along the way, because I think that's misleading the general public at large as to what we were talking about originally. And I obviously apologize for that. It was not my intention to mislead anybody, but I just want to make sure that everybody understands what are the facts that are out there.
Great. Thank you, Herb. So I appreciate sort of the 4 points you made to sort of gesture, for the future, right, to be forward thinking. But I actually right now would just like to hear from board members about, particularly for the point that Herb made about his recommendation to not proceed with this grant. Are there any questions or any comments that board members would like to take up on that particular point, or on that recommendation is what I'm hearing? Go ahead, Mary. You're on mute. And you have a cat, I think that's why.
I got a cat too. Yeah, sorry.
It's okay.
No, I think it'd be wise to wait for a year. That my support of this was contingent upon there being 3 phases. It was news to me that that was not the case. But also I think we may perhaps come up with a better case, especially if you do our sidewalk inventory. I think we'll just have a stronger case, but in a year. So I think I would like to take the town manager's recommendation and just wait a year, build a stronger case. I still support the project, but I don't think we should move on it really quickly, especially before we've really worked out our capital budget and considered other capital needs in the town.
Marcia, did you have your hand up? Thank you, Mary.
Yeah, I have. I want to postpone as well. I have different concerns. First and foremost, the letter that was drafted, I have concerns that could even rise to the level of mail fraud. We don't have the money that we are representing that we have for this. That process has to go, as Herb said, through an article warrant process. And, the town has to vote that we spend money, especially this type of money. Beyond that, even if all the ducks were in order, I would have problems. I think we need to know what about this archaeology business on the corner of Moore Lane. We need to know that we're not disturbing anything. What about, the budget didn't seem to have everything included, like the poles for being moved. That's a significant expense for the utility poles. You're going to have to cross the street several times. And if we're crossing the street, does that mean that we're going to have flashing lights? How much are flashing lights? Because if this is for, children and things to walk, and that's a bad corner there by Bragg Hill. So I think that has to be considered. Sidewalks don't fall under statutory rules for eminent domain. So, I don't know how, if someone doesn't really want to sell, I don't know who determined that the right-of-way costs were going to be $1,000 per person. I think that's premature, and we're a long ways from being ready. So I think, yes, we have no choice but to postpone.
Okay. Thank you, Marcia. Any other board member comments on the recommendation? Go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, I support the project completely. I think the misinterpretation means that we realistically can't proceed as planned because we need the approval for the funding and so on. I'm hoping that it won't delay the project very much if we're doing phase 3 along with phase 2 in the year that we thought we would be doing 3, then maybe that won't be as big an issue. That's pretty much it. But I'm hoping. Oh, I know what it was. The only other question I had was, does this project qualify for any other potential grants from the state in relationship to climate things or anything that we're aware of that could be tapped in to make it to get it paid for before an article vote?
Herb, did you want to signal or gesture to other possible funding sources outside of this grant? If you may wish to.
There are some other grant funds that could deal with it, but the logical one to go to is this Bike and Ped grant program. That's the one where you're going to get 80% from the feds, 20% would be the match. That follows through with the construction as well as the final engineering type of, in other words, both phase 2 and 3. I'm not aware of, say, other funding that could be used, say, as the local match. I'm not going to say American Recovery Funds at this point because I don't fully understand what are going to be trickle down as the actual guidelines that we could use. If those monies could be used, we're going to get $337,000 from the feds. So there's a possibility, but even though I say that, I'm not putting that on the table in any stretch of the means at this point. You might be able to look at land and water conservation funds through the Agency of Natural Resources. That's again another federal source, but you would end up probably having to apply for one or the other. You can't use 2 federal sources of money to sort of leverage each other in the process or to come into the same project. So again, the Bike and Ped is usually the go-to grant program, and that's the same basic answer that Rita would give you. If there's something else that pops up that I'm not aware of, such as a green industry or sustainability type of grant program out there, I'm not aware of them at this point. And then just very quickly to Marcia's concerns, I understand every single one that she's talking about. Every single one of the ones that you had talked about, Marcia, would have been picked up on and done as part of the phase 2 project. Every single one of those issues. So if we decide to move forward, each and every single one of those issues would be picked up on and dealt with as part of the process. But by doing so, again, the town would be committing itself to moving forward. I won't say regardless of cost, but basically the town would be committing itself to moving forward with the sidewalk. There may be things that could be tweaked or what have you, but again, those issues would be addressed during that phase 2 process.
Claudette, did you have a comment or, okay, Mary?
Oh, just a question about the eminent domain issue. If the area for the sidewalk is within the town right of way, does that change the legal, I don't know, sort of opportunity for eminent domain? In other words,
if it's all within the town right of way, there would be no necessary eminent domain. And to be clear, The town does not like doing eminent domain, and that would, if we even approach that, that would be a topic of last resort. At this point, the design is intended to try to minimize as much interference with property owners along the way. And so far, the alignment has not raised an issue with any individuals that would be concerned about it. Clearly, there are folks on the opposite side of the road that would have some issues, and that has weighed into the alternative at this point. But generally, the current topography is a major component of the alignment as it's proposed today. But again, if it's all within right of way, there is no need to have a discussion about necessity.
Okay, I don't quite understand what you said. So if it's within the town right of way, then eminent domain doesn't even come into play? Is that what you're saying?
Correct.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
Sorry, that's necessity in that one.
That's all right. I just want to be really clear.
Go ahead, Marcia. You had a follow-up?
So that just makes the whole budget even muddier for me, because we're paying $28,000 for 22 easements. And so if it's in our right of way, I'm not exactly sure how that comes up, but begs the question anyway.
Construction easements.
Yeah.
Yeah, again, that's a phase 2 issue that comes up. So you're diving into the actual implementation phase, but there are easements that are required potentially in some areas, and also there are construction easements that are required as part of a normal process. Again, phase 2 would identify specifically if any easements are required, whether construction or otherwise. At this point, again, for the phase 1 scoping analysis that they did, it's a preliminary dive into the say the highway maps and that sort of stuff to see where there may be potential easement related issues.
The only, Marcia, did you have a follow-up? Sorry, did I see your hand?
Yeah, I was just going to say, so all of this just goes to when we do get to that stage, if and when we get to that stage, we need to have really clear idea of how much the outer edge of this is going to cost. And then I just wanted to say, for the record, because I think people get very upset about who's for what and who's against what. From my perspective, it's not about me and what I think. I would vote for something if I thought all the ducks were in order. Legally, I don't think they are here. And so I think we don't have any choice but to postpone.
Thank you, Marcia. I really appreciate that, right? Because there's obviously audience members sort of like, counting future votes, right? And so I appreciate your comment. The only thing I would add is, I think it's really unfortunate that there's been this implied ask of our community to have their organizing work for something they see value in mirror the grant application process, right? Like we should know if people want a sidewalk independent of the process to get the money for the sidewalk, right? And I understand that phase 1 sort of digs up some of those questions, right? But it does so for the point of making a grant application really attractive. So I think, I would really, I think it is a question for capital budgeting and a long-term planning, and it should involve some of our colleagues on the planning commission, ideally, and not to sort of start over in any deliberative way, but I think this is, I guess my rhetorical point that I would make is I would like capital projects, strategic community endeavors to not be so linked with their funding sources. And yes, I recognize that people want to know about the fiscal stewardship of our vision, but we should know what it is that we want to do and then figure out how we are going to pay for it within our means of a small community and the grant opportunities we have. So I guess that's my bummer, right? That we've sort of linked a little bit of grassroots organizing to the funding process. And I don't know how that happened. And I'm disappointed in that, because the board has, as Marcia was alluding to, the board has to answer questions once the community interest has been established. So I don't know if that makes sense, but hopefully people can appreciate some of what I tried to say.
Roger.
Yes.
Just, I would actually not oppose you, but I would add that there was a grassroots effort that was instrumental in working well together to identify an issue in the particular community, brought it to the attention of the select board after talking to some department heads, and was supportive as well as engaged in the particular process, and helped to spread the word so that as much public was involved in the process. I hear what I think you're saying is that we would like to have our projects developed through grassroots efforts and all that through our normal capital budgeting process, so we know what are the list of projects, and then we can pick and choose those projects to go for grants and all that sort of stuff. So I understand what you're saying, but I don't want you to belittle what
No.
involvement was, because it was pretty good involvement for the project at hand, and I do think that they went through the proper steps to get to where we are today. And it's I will say it's unfortunate on my part that I wasn't quick enough to pick up on the fact that we can't separate phase 2 from phase 3.
Yeah, and look, like the last, and I don't have to get the last word, so board members, please chime in, and then we'll move on to our next agenda item. Is, you know, I think last week at our last meeting, Marcia asked the question, and we'll take public comment. I see hands. And I think Marcia sort of asked a wider question about a different topic. What does public safety look like, right? And so to the extent that sidewalk infrastructure is both physical and social infrastructure, and is like a conversation around public safety and traffic control, you know, the conversation can be broadened out, but I think like ultimately we need to have a process for how it is broadened out and how, you know, we go about it. And so power holders, entrenched bureaucrats always talk about process and having a plan. So I know that that is frustrating, but I think Herb has had some suggestions for, you know, how to keep the energy forward. And I think these are good suggestions. And I want the board to think about it in their budget season, because I do not want a cultural war of an article warning where I suddenly have 60 petition signature, whatever, hundreds petition signatures for this sidewalk, and the board has no ability to do the work that we are elected to do. So I guess I'm putting ourselves on notice to think meaningfully about this project so we don't get into a cultural war with our community. And Marcia's smiling, so maybe she agrees. Go ahead, Marcia.
I'm always against cultural wars. What I think first and foremost is that the statutes cover this stuff, and that there is a mechanism for all of this to work. And that's what I'm saying, that it just has to follow the process. And that process also anticipates that people are supposed to have a part in the process. And in fact, I've always, it's no secret, I've always had a problem with the way how the town plans were developed. I think we need to have more involvement from people. And in fact, why don't we consider inviting people to, you know, actually make sort of petitions about things that they want, but in time for budget season, so that we have time to put them on the warrant article. Yeah. Because the process exists for all of this to happen. It's just that we have to get people sort of on notice about how it works. And I welcome everybody getting involved.
Right. Or else how we would like it to work, which is still good, because it's, yeah, I hear that. Okay, anyone else have a word before I turn it over to some public comments? Okay. All right, so we'll take some public comments a little bit. Oh, I saw a hand. Elliot, did you have your hand up?
I did. I think Peter, I can tell, is just like ants in his pants, wanted to say something. So maybe Peter, if you want to go first. Yeah, I'm sorry. I joined late. So I just heard the last 15 minutes or so.
Can you just tell us who you are and your locatable address?
Elliot Rico on 27 Hillside Road.
Great.
Ice cream.
My daughter wants more ice cream. I think I missed a lot of the substantive discussion around maybe some parts of the process that were missed, but I will say, like, the last 10 minutes were really disheartening because it sounds like everything you guys wanted to see done, I feel like you're disincentivizing. Like it seems like there was a very active group of citizens who wanted to do something to improve the community they live in and put in a tremendous amount of time, their own time and effort, and put themselves out there knowing kind of how nasty things can get in this town with the smallest things, and have just at a great expense to themselves and their free time, their most limited resource, tried to make this thing happen. So I'm sorry I missed there sounds like there's some phasing issues, but like if you want to see people work to improve their town, like I can't think of a better example from what you saw for this effort. So if there was a part that was missed, I'd be curious to know what it was.
Thanks. So the too long didn't read version, or too long, or sorry. So the TLDR, like not able, the short version is, we don't have the money, right? We don't have the 300,000 that requires a combination of a phase 2, phase 3. So we can't be on the hook for that. And then also, as Herb alluded to, so much of this process, and I tried to allude to, so much of this process was linked to a phase 1, 2, and 3, and that we would have some funds that we could commit to for phase 2 to move along this project. But it turns out that phase 2 and phase 3 are together. And the board is not positioned, mostly financially. And
I would just say I would caution. I would be very cautious on how you respond to this, because what I'm hearing is don't spend your time to try to find funding from the state to improve the situation of the town. And it's not going to be worth your effort. That's like kind of like just again, I knew like the last 10 minutes, just the last 2 comments I heard, I'm kind of like, oh my gosh, like,
yeah,
this is like exactly what the community should be doing. And then it seems like don't link it to a funding source, but then you're also saying we don't have the money. Well,
Exactly.
yeah, and so the agenda item, and then I think Marcia may remind us of this, the agenda item for our discussion is to move forward with this grant. It's not to talk about sidewalks or even the Beaver Meadow sidewalk. Again, it seems so much of this project is linked to this funding source, which is a process question, which I know is disheartening. So I'll take more public comment. Peter Warner. Marcia, and then I'll get back to you. I'm sorry if I interjected.
Button line. Shoshana, you want to go? Okay, I have to say, Roger, I feel, to echo Elliot, is my internet okay?
Yeah, we hear you.
I feel a little bit condescended to in the last 20 minutes for sure, Roger. And let me just back up a little bit. The reason that we know that this phase 2 and phase 3 are not severable is because we did the work to find that out. Vince Crow, who's not here tonight, made the call to VTrans, then sent a note to Herb, and that's how we found out. Clearly, Rita knew all along that the grant was going forward in the way that she knew how to do it. But let's just be clear here. We've been involved the whole time. In February, you guys passed unanimously because you heard from numerous residents. We have 9 or 10 on tonight. And now you're telling us, okay, we don't have the money, period. We all understood, and I agreed with Claudette in the last meeting, that I understood that it was $20,600 going into phase 2. Somebody screwed up here, and I think it's an honest mistake, and that's completely fine, and I'm not going to throw anybody under the bus, but let's be clear. There has been no accountability here from February to June on what was happening. A simple phone call could have answered this question and allowed us to organize ourselves and get this right so that we can go after the money that Elliot talked about. Now, we are talking here about a public safety issue. Marcia's talking about, let's talk about public safety. Let's talk about the danger on the road that Rob very articulately described a situation, an incident where he was encountering a situation where it was almost an accident. Marcia, in her campaign, said very distinct, I have the quote right here, Beaver Meadow is not safe to walk on. So this is not a cultural war Roger, this is a public safety issue. And there is no reason under the sun. There are people who lived in this town for 45 years who support the sidewalk. This is not a new versus young. This is not Democrat versus Republican. This is a public safety issue. We had a 15-year-old almost hit the other day, and it caused a little blow up on the listserv because people thought that the mother was trying to get the sidewalk when she was only begging people to slow down. Now, what I'm asking for here is a little clarity. And I don't want to be pushed back. You guys decided unanimously to move forward. We'll put it on the ballot and it will win because it's popular. And if you say then we don't have the money, we're going to have to figure that out. But if you go to 80-20, it is absolutely worth it to invest in this kind of infrastructure. We've talked about this many times. It is worth it in terms of people's health and safety in this town. The returns will be tenfold over the long run if you keep people safe and you complete the loop.
Right. I'm going to take a comment from Marcia. And Peter, just to say that I want to avoid, I guess, a conflict between the board and the community. And
I absolutely do too. But you guys have to be accountable, Roger, to what we understood. And let me, sorry, Roger, but I reached out on numerous times, not just to yourself, but to other board members, including Herb, asking how is it going with the grant? Can we help with the grant? We have people in our group that are experts. Colleen, who lives up the block from me, gets $1 million grants on a yearly basis at Dartmouth. Very, very well trained in this. So we had the expertise to help. We were told, hey, it's under control. So I'm just, I'm willing to say, okay, honest mistake, but please don't tell me then, oh, you're starting a cultural war because you want to keep the, community safe on the road.
And so thank you, Peter. And then I'm going to take Marcia's comment, and then I want to hear from
Thanks,
board
Roger.
members.
And I appreciate you hearing me out.
And no, I appreciate, and I want to hear, the board can't know what they don't know. And so after I hear Marcia's comment and we take more public comment, I want to know more about, some of the points you're making, because we were unaware of this. We learned it last week. Okay. So, we're all a little embarrassed. Marcia, go ahead.
I just wanted to clarify. Yes, I agree. Safety is ultimate. But, Peter, I used to work at the college and as of until January. And my job was with international students. And there were lots of things that I had to say. This isn't possible in the way that you want it to go because of the law. But I can tell you what way is possible. And I think that what we have here is, the way I got to be on this board was my interest was piqued when I was under some sort of threat. And I wanted to get involved. And so for 3 years, every week, I went to meetings in the town. And you just have to do that sometimes. And it's very frustrating and you don't always get what you want. I think in this case, what we're going to do, hopefully, is as a community, understand the process a little bit better. And maybe for possibly the first time, get a lot of community involvement and have people really start to understand what's going on. And I'm all about trying to get people to know how to work within the board and the statutes, but I can't recommend what was recommended here, because we'd be doing something we shouldn't be doing legally by making a representation that we had voted for the money. Whether or not we get a grant, the town can vote for this money, but it has to be a warrant article. Can
I just respond? And I agree with Marcia. I don't think we should go forward tonight with the warrant, but I think you all should know that we are very concerned about the way this process has gone from February to June without any accountability, number one. And number two, Marcia, I work at Dartmouth. There's nothing more that concerns the people, public safety at Dartmouth, than pedestrian safety. Dartmouth is all about sidewalks. I think there's a gentleman here tonight who knows a lot about that. So you know, this is a pedestrian issue. And what we're asking for is that you acknowledge that the pedestrians on Beaver Meadow are walking in a truck route. And it's been going on for too long, and with distracted driving and speeding on the increase, something is going to happen out there. And I will hold fire. And I believe that Roger got rid of my video, but that's okay. You don't need to see me.
I don't. I was trying to remove your pin, not. I'm sorry, Peter.
That's okay. And I'm going to let my colleague speak.
Okay, I'm removing your pin. Okay, so I think Andy Shear was next, I believe, and I confess I didn't see, if that's okay. Apologies if that's not the order.
I can go, sorry, if that's okay. Andy Shear, 23 Hazen Street. I have a couple questions. So is the money, or the pot of money, this may be a question for the V-Trans pedestrian grant, is that available on an annual basis? Is this like an ongoing thing? So we're not missing the boat?
Can you get through your other questions and I'll ask Herb to answer them?
Sure. Okay. Second question is, and I guess, you know, this is kind of a cart in the horse sort of situation. We need a phase 2 grant to get the confidence of the public, but it seems like the 2 and the 3 have to come together. So what's going to be the proposal that gets us across the line so we can actually get to that point? Does that make sense? Like if you know, if we have to get a phase 2 grant, but it only comes with the 3, which is signing you up for construction, how are we going to do this?
So what are your other questions?
I forgot it. So
okay.
That's it for now.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah. Herb, would you like to answer that? I think we certainly need a phase 2 process, if not, again, a funding source for a phase 2 process, because I'm trying.
So
that's my point this evening.
Yeah, so it is an annual funding. There is a pot of money every single year that's available. So this is not sort of like a one and done sort of thing. Each year, this is a regular pot of money that you can apply for. With regard to trying to do a phase 2 type of thing, I think there are a couple different options that are out there. First and foremost, the 4 things that I mentioned in terms of the inventory, the capital budget and program, the budget process, and the possibility of a special warrant article are sort of four ways of looking at how additional defendability of the segment can be looked at and incorporated into, for lack of a better term, a master plan for Norwich. The budget process can be part of identifying money to raise and suggest to voters as to get a project done. And obviously a special article is another way of doing that besides the budget. For a phase 2 type of thing, 20% of what we think is needed for a phase 2 is about that $20,600, so $21,000. If the town wanted to raise its own amount of money to do the phase 2 work without a grant program, that's a possibility. And that total amount of money is listed in the scoping analysis. That's where we get, the $20,600 is where we got the number from with regard to the Dubois and King scoping analysis. So you could see the total amount of money that we might need for that. I don't know. I'm trying to think if there are other grant sources that may be available that would allow you to just do a phase 2 side of stuff and then be able to, if you decide to move forward as a community to do a phase 3 construction type stuff. I'd have to ask Rita that. I'm not aware of anything at this point that could be used for that. If there is, it's probably much more competitive or a much smaller sum of money to go forward on. But I think that beyond a source of money, I think that there's continual, whether it's part of the 4 processes that I talked about or a separate process unto itself, where the community could have some further discussion, either facilitated or otherwise, to get toward a level of additional consensus on moving forward with a complete application, which is the phase 2 and 3 combined. In other words, a commitment to do it. Again, this is the similar stage that we're at with regard to, or a little bit before the Church Street project, where this town decided to move forward with something. After a number of years, they decided not to, and there had to be some payback. So where I'm at is, if the town wanted to move forward with its own sort of actions to decide whether it's part of one of these 4 processes or as a separate process to move forward with this project, to garner that commitment, and probably a fairly solidified commitment to move forward, you could do that and then make application for phases 2 and 3 combined. And that doesn't necessarily cost money, but it's going to invest people power, similar to what you folks have done as neighbors already, and have already collected. So, and some of it may be a regurgitation, but others may be renewed commitment to something to go forward with a phase 2 and 3 combined.
So
I don't know if that fully answers your question, Andrew.
the kernel in that is, folks, that the board could develop the equivalent of a phase 2 process, potentially identify other funding sources for the phase 2 process should we feel that this project needs to be done in 3 phases as we've previously been discussed. Is that sort of okay? Andy, did you have a follow-up question?
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to make a comment. I mean, I was looking over the grant, things in the grant in terms of how they score it. And, I just feel like in terms of this project, I think the town does score very highly, and I think we are in a good position for it. And I just hope that, there will be the support for it a year from now. I mean, we've had hundreds of people, that we've been emailing with and, who are backers of this project. And, I kind of what we said earlier, I hate to sort of lose some of that momentum. It's going to be pretty quiet now between now and budget season. But, I hope that in general that the board will, remain engaged with the community on this, and that we can move forward, because I do think, it's worthwhile. And I think, for a lot of reasons. So thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Shoshana, you next.
Hi, I'm Shoshana Hort, 149 Beaver Meadow Road. And I came to this, I'm one of the neighbors that's been involved early on in this project. And I really came in resigned to the fact that it was not going to be go forward tonight. And I totally understand that and feel really frustrated with how things kind of evolved. So my goal of the meeting was to say, okay, well, what is the path forward? And I do, though, want to say, though, I really appreciate what Elliot said. Like, I kind of got the sense that the process this far is really not well understood amongst the people here. And I've been part of it. And I just want to say, we started this in 2019. We went to the town with concerns about the road. And we came and we said, is it speed bumps? Is it sidewalk? Is it this? We met with folks from the town. We went to the select board, and we were really guided to do this process, to say that probably the best path forward would be a sidewalk, and to go for a grant and start with the scoping study. And so this is not, we were not like renegade making this go forward. This was really in collaboration with the town. And I participated in all of the scoping study meetings, and lots of people joined in. And I talked to lots of neighbors, and I have to say it's been the most collaborative and process I've been part of in this town, including more people than I've ever been in this town in the process. So I do feel a little bit, I don't feel like we were like, there's a grant, let's find something to pay for. It really was, we found a need, and then it was really the select board at the time and the town that really guided this process. And we just were there to try to help it along. So I just really want to make sure that's really clear. And then I guess my second thing is, which is what I really wanted to say, is that I totally understand why you guys are not voting to go proceed with this. But I guess I would say, okay, well then what is the next step? When is the next step? I don't want it to just drop and then it be forgotten about. So I'm looking for some just, accountability to say, okay, this is how we will proceed.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Is there any more public comment? So frustratingly, this agenda item was to discuss the grant and the furthering moving with the grant, right? And I think we've heard a lot about the project, right, at large. And but I don't think the board is prepared to discuss the next steps for the project. I think Herb has alluded to some 4 options for continual engagement. And I think board members have you know, weighed in and sort of their broad support and some of their concerns. I think for me, I guess my point that I wanted to make this whole time was just the board going through a process, a capital process for this project that is independent of this grant. And because the grant is just a funding source, it doesn't have to be the process. And I really appreciate I personally, and maybe I don't want to speak for the board, I'll let them weigh in a little bit. I appreciate the reminder that this process came before any grant. Any other, Herb, did you want to make a comment? And I'm surprised that I'm hearing that a member of the public made the inquiry to the granting agency. I was under the impression that you had contacted Rita.
So well, because I've been out of the office for a little bit, I was reacting to emails that I was running across first. So what I'm basically just saying is that as Peter and the group know that I'm available to meet with the group, you know, outside of this meeting to answer questions, to clarify some concerns that were here, because I think there have been some things on different fronts or different facets that aren't necessarily accurate. But I think the one thing that is true is that there has been a lot of public engagement throughout this entire process, and everybody agrees to this. But I'm happy to, especially to clarify for Elliot some of the stuff that he missed or things why I wasn't here the last 2 weeks, and to at least make sure that everybody understands. But I don't think that's for a meeting tonight. That's for me to meet with the group. If you folks want to have me, I'm happy to do that, and to help identify through the 4 things that I've identified where we can continue to stay engaged in the process, or where you can stay engaged in the process and participate, so that that at least the best foot forward continues to happen.
Okay. Peter, would you like to make a final comment, and then we should move on?
Yes, Roger, thank you. I'm from Chicago, and Mayor Daley when he didn't want people to talk, he would shut off their mic. I feel a little bit like that with my video. But anyway,
to start. Yeah, sorry, there you go.
That's okay. Not that I need to see myself, but I feel a little bit weird to talking to a voice.
Go. Sorry.
I just think Shoshana's point really deserves more of an answer, frankly. And here's why: because we know where the vote is tonight. This is a formality. What we're asking for is accountability for, why we lost all this time, 5 months, where we couldn't do anything. And number 2 is something really concrete, some leadership about where we're going to go from here. For, as Shoshana said, from 2019, we have been telling you all that Beaver Meadow is not safe. And not a single thing has been done. Not a thing with the speed carts, not a thing with the fog lines, not a single thing with any signage. Nothing has been done to slow the cars down. It's not a police problem. And to expect our understaffed police officers to be patrolling Beaver Meadow is way too much to expect. And the weekends it's a field day because there is no police presence, and the cars it's very, very dangerous. And so we're asking, I know where the vote's going tonight. I agree. You can't vote for this. I understand that, right? But what I'm saying is we have been part of the process, as Shoshana said, and we have been working with you all, and we would appreciate some leadership where you guys are saying, all right, here's what we're going to do. We're going to work on the warrant. We're going to work on figuring out how we can pay for this if we get the 80% from the state, and work together on this. We want to work with you all. That's what we have been doing. We could have put this up on the ballot last March. We thought about it. We didn't, because we had intense consultation with select board members and Herb. We decided not to do that. So we'd appreciate not sort of being brushed off tonight by, well, okay, the vote, it's a technicality, Roger. We know that this vote's not happening. We're talking about this issue, and this is the last time, frankly, that we're going to be able to. It's not so easy for us to get together and be here with you all. But as Shoshana said, we'll keep coming and we'll keep saying it. But we'd appreciate somebody stepping forward and saying, you know what, I'm going to take ownership of this and help us move this forward and get the study done on phase 2. So we're clear on some of the issues. I believe eminent domain is not an issue, but that was thrown out tonight. But Herb said that that wasn't an issue. So I'm wondering, are there significant phase 2 issues that we are not accounting for? In my view of listening to everybody and reading the grant, there are not. So this is not an insurmountable issue, but we need some leadership and we'd love to work with you all on it. Thanks.
Can I get a motion and then we can have a continued discussion? I think there should be I think there should be a motion on record for this. Can I get a motion? Okay, go ahead, Claudette.
Roger, so I move that we decline the Vermont Bike Ped grant application. Does that?
Can I offer a suggestion, Claudette? Is that that the board opt not to apply for a bike and ped program at this time for the Beaver Meadow Road sidewalk?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay.
Okay, any further discussion?
I do agree with, or if I may, Roger.
Please.
I agree with the residents that are saying we need to identify the next steps. And I am also frankly quite disappointed that it got to this point before we knew that 2 and 3 were not separable. That is frustrating. And we only knew about it last week.
Would have been a different.
We, the board.
Yep, would have been a different conversation. Yep.
And town manager.
Okay.
Please don't throw me under the bus.
Sure. Yes, new information. Go ahead, Marcia.
I think, Peter's point is well taken. What we need probably is something like, a how-to book for how to engage with the board, how to make, there is actually, I put together a whole petition when I was interested in something. There are processes in the statutes, and if you don't know how to read the statutes, or don't have time or whatever, it's not rocket science, but we could maybe help with something like that. And in the interim, I think maybe we could put on the board's agenda that we think about what's the easiest thing to do for helping this speeding issue. Is it a stop sign? There must be something that we can do that's not going to break the budget and it is perfectly, correct for us to do, but will help get us to the point where a bigger decision can be made appropriately. So you want me to put that in a memo for requesting an agenda item?
Certainly not for June 9th because
no.
But yes, I think certainly, and there's lots of avenues for future conversation about it. I think what we've heard is there needs to be express commitment for that, and then when we did have it, an invitation needs to be properly extended. And I think to folks, to your point, Marcia, I certainly, we certainly welcome a potential citizen petition as we always do, but it's always nice to know about it maybe at the start of budget season rather than in February, so that way we can meaningfully incorporate it into our work. And so that is, the board may wish to maybe make a formal recommendation to this group in the spirit of collaboration. But so to answer your question, yes, that I would appreciate. I think it would be appreciated.
Okay. And I think if we could also start to think maybe about some sort of a document, something on the website, something that helps people understand this is how things work. And if you want a big ticket item, this is the process.
Yes. Or the process for this budget season, because I think we've heard that folks have believed that they have followed a deliberative process, and they weren't heard on that deliberative process. And so we will take that also in, we hear that, right?
Got it.
Whew. We hear you. And we are disappointed too. We all are. Okay. So can we, okay, so we have a motion and a second on the table. Any further discussion? Does someone else want to get anything else in? Okay.
Can you read it again?
So the motion was to not, Claudette moved to not move forward with the bike ped grant for the Beaver Meadow project. It was a not. So at this time, is there all in favor? Please raise your hand. Okay. We're not moving forward at this time with this grant. Okay. Go ahead, Claudette.
Can I just ask that, I know we have discussed the speed, the flashing speed signs before, and if we can get some sense from Herb about costs and if it can be done in a relatively expeditious manner for either our next meeting or the meeting after that.
In your current capital budget and program, there's some information on a speed cart type of thing that Jennifer Frank was recommending to you. But I think she also had some emails. I'll try to dig those up again and try to get them off to you guys for so you have refreshed information.
And I don't recall that actually on that, but I could be wrong. But yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Marcia, and then we should move on because we're over. Go ahead.
I'm just wondering if it's possible to look into the cost of one of those automated ticketing things. I know that's a leap, but I'm just wondering.
I think we should make a future agenda item if we wanted to like go into the traffic calming measures more broadly, right? And maybe even how it relates to some of our public safety questions. That would be what I might say, if that's okay. Okay. Peter, I will take your public comment. We should move on.
Very, very quick and very relevant. I believe you all decided, Doug Wilderbring brought up the speed carts, and I believe you even voted on something. So there, and I was waiting for that to happen, and it never did. So I believe there's something back a few meetings back where you all discussed speed carts and what Officer Frank had recommended. So I believe you've even discussed that earlier, but so just
that's what I'm referring to, Roger. I have information that I'll get to.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Wait, I think my internet connection is unstable. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So it sounds like Herb answered Peter. I didn't hear Peter's question, but it sounds like he got an answer. Okay. Okay, so let's move on to the next agenda item. Is that okay? Okay. So this is a town manager's report, and so we would like to hear an update on some financial procedures. We would like to sort of know more about the current situation with the staffing of the finance office. I think the prompt for this agenda item at a special meeting, Herb, was that we had noticed some irregularities, or what we perceived to be irregularities in the reporting. And we wanted some clarity on that. We also had some questions about what kind of review you do or not do in your absence for our finance assistant, and then how it is that you designate someone to sign on your behalf for financial matters when you're out of the office. So these are just some questions, and I'm sure as you talk to us, some other things will pop out.
Sure. So I have a number of things to talk about. First of all, you did receive in an amended packet yesterday the normal financial report information, which was supposed to make it in your packet, which didn't. So I had that run and put in a revised packet yesterday. I'm in the middle of preparing the dashboard update since Seth's departure. Becky had given me the Excel report to put into the dashboard, but it didn't suppress the zeros. So when I entered it in, so there's a different format of the Excel export that she's given me. I just haven't had time to put it into the dashboard to get you the dashboard. So I will be getting you the April dashboard probably tomorrow once I incorporate the numbers in there. But I'll entertain any questions on the financial reports if you've had a chance to review those. I will say, just in generally speaking, that with regard to the revenues, we're generally okay with the revenues overall, a little bit shy from where I think we would expect to be, but we're in pretty good shape. We're in good shape overall with regard to taxes, including delinquent taxes. On the expense side, it looks like we're a little bit headed toward over budget in terms of what we spend per month by probably about $3,500, $3,700. But again, there are some line items that we've paid 100%. So as we approach toward the end of the year, I'm hoping that's more leveling out rather than being a lot of over budget expenditures. COVID clearly has had a factor in this process, as we've discussed before. A number of our rec related revenues that we anticipated have not come in because we haven't been able to do a number of the programs. On the other side of the coin, we haven't been able to expend some of those sorts of similar rec things, but we did get some unanticipated revenue from the state with regard to, with them not doing the structures in the paving grant this year. They took a pot of money and just divvied it up to each of the communities from that standpoint. So that's a little extra revenue that we didn't anticipate. But if people have particular questions on the reports, you can do that. But I would just ask if we could get through some of the other stuff first before we come in with the questions. I sent out to board members specifically in reply to Claudette, because she wanted an update on the delinquent tax report type stuff. There was some concern last time with giving you the whole report. So what I tried to do was to just summarize what the report was, which was essentially a redaction of names. But financially speaking, based on the delinquent report that we have to date, COVID did not have a major impact on the creation or stuff with regard to delinquent taxes and the amount of money that we have. Actually, at this time, we're have a little bit, in terms of total dollars, a little bit fewer dollars owed than we typically do. So that's good news from that standpoint. And most of the delinquent taxpayers continue to be the usual suspects in not doing stuff. But I will say that Becky is doing a good job of getting, for those that she's been able to contact, getting up some payment programs. But there, with regard to this year's new delinquent taxpayer list for the 2021 year, there are a number of folks that we do not have contact with and cannot get contact with. So we're continuing to explore how to get in contact with those property owners or people responsible for those properties to try to minimize the delinquent taxes owed there. For the finance office, since Seth's departure just today, I've put John Casey in place, who's a replacement for Seth. He just started today. The nice thing about Robert Half and Associates is that they did not put us under a new contract. They which would have, because when again, it's a temporary agency. If you want to buy out your temp during that process, there's a percentage amount that you have to pay to buy that person out. As each working hour goes by, that percentage drops in terms of what the buyout is. The kind thing that Robert Half did was they picked up where we left off with Seth. So instead of starting back at, say, 100% payoff, they're acknowledging that John Seth are part of the same contract. So we're not having to go back on that. In addition, with regard to the sixth advertising on the finance director, that deadline closed while I was away. As from my preliminary review, we have less than half a dozen candidates that came in. I haven't had a chance to look at them from that standpoint because I've been dealing with John Casey today in the interim and getting him trying to get him up to speed as quickly as possible. There are a couple with so far with some input from Miranda. She indicated that it doesn't look like that there are a lot of strong candidates in that pool, but I haven't had a chance to look at them either. The pre-audit is underway. We're in contact with the auditor. They've sent us a list and the sample of information that they're looking for. So Becky has started to pull that information together. Cynthia Stoddard will be in this coming week to further sit down with Becky to go through the items that are needed in order to complete the pre-audit process. This is where Cynthia spends much of her contract period in helping us in this interim phase of not having a finance director, since she's good at the NEMRIC type stuff and doing some of the higher level stuff that we need to give to Bonnie Batchelder. The AP warrant process, for me, it's been a little bit frustrating the last couple AP warrants because we've had a couple different inaccuracies that have popped up. The issue that I've discovered is that once you print the AP warrant, you cannot adjust it to print again with the adjustments. So the typical process that I have is that I inherited from Roberta is that I get the invoices and the AP warrant, and I go through and basically try to review and see if there are any errors that pop up. When in like this last AP warrant, there was an issue that I figured out while I was away reviewing information, and even if I was present, the AP warrant had been printed at that point, which means that the checks had been printed. The NEMRIC system, as an internal financial safeguard, will not allow you to change that AP warrant. So in this particular instance, when you go forward and you see some handwritten changes on the AP warrant, we're acknowledging that we identified those errors. Becky made the corrections immediately afterward with journal entries, and I've had her already print out the journal entries so that it shows that the dental and the retirement stuff were put in the proper categories based on my review of finding the couple inaccuracies. The problem that I have is that once that AP warrant is printed, it cannot be reprinted in a changed format. So what I just emailed this to you folks ahead of the meeting. I've talked with Becky at length today to figure out how can we amend our approval process so that either I'm involved in the process earlier of approval to try to identify these things so we can minimize any kind of corrections at the AP warrant level. And what Becky and I have agreed to do, which is outlined in the email that I sent to you, is essentially when she gets to the point where she's entered information into the system, she'll give me the invoices and what's called the edit list, which is sort of like a draft. For lack of a better term, it's a draft AP warrant. At that point, she'll give me the information to go through and review. That has a lot of the similar, actually it's more information, but it has the similar information that's on the AP warrant and then some. But that's an opportunity where I can go through the approval process with her. If I identify issues, then I can raise them, she can make the changes, and then print out the AP warrant. So that revised process should minimize any potential errors on the AP warrant that you folks finally see in your packets. That's the major improvement there with regard to that. I've already mentioned the updated dashboard status. Now, when I'm out of the office, typically I have a person that is second in command with and typically that for the last couple police chief heads, it's been the police chief that is when Phil Deckert left. Phil Deckert was always the fill-in. When he left, I did the police chief, and I continued with the police chief after Doug Robinson left. With Jennifer Frank leaving, at this point, I am not inclined to have an interim police chief serving as my second in command. The way that I left it in this last iteration when I was away is that because I was still in state, had my cell phone, was bouncing in and out of Norwich, that if there were things that needed to occur, I would still be in contact to deal with everything. So I did not put a second person in command, if you will, with me being out of the office for the last couple of weeks. However, I did prearrange it with Becky and with Miranda as part of the approval process for the AP and the payroll, that when Becky got done the stuff that she did, she would scan the information, give it to me. I did the review that I normally do here in the office. And then when I was satisfied with the information that went out, including finding the latest error on the AP warrant, that's why there were handwritten comments on the AP warrant, I would basically say I reviewed it with these changes, we're good to go forward, and Miranda can sign the warrants on my behalf. And we did that in a particular email, and that sign-off process is included in the AP warrant folder for the payroll process that occurred while I was absent. So normally I have a second in charge. At this point, I don't have a formal second in charge. That's not a requirement, but that's something that I typically do. At this point, I'm not fully comfortable making a second in charge with regard to the current department head staff. And that will remain that way until I either feel comfortable with a finance director in place or a police chief in place.
Okay. Mary, did you have a question or comment for Herb?
Yes, I'm noticing, for instance, that the police have an officer in charge, and I think it's not acceptable to not have backup. And that Herb, you could be incapacitated in some way. I'm just going to say that, and I'm going to be quiet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I understand that, and my concern is that I have excellent department heads. But at this point, I'm not resolved to particularly naming one to be my second in command. In that particular instance, there are individuals that are for, say, an emergency response situation. Our emergency plan is set up adequately to handle that, which is both the officer in charge at police and the fire chief have the ability to deal with the emergency operations system. So that's all handled from that standpoint. With regard to any other aspect of particular issues, I do agree that I need to name somebody, but I'm not yet ready to name somebody.
So Herb, just to be clear, did you appoint or a designee for the signing of financials, and was that designee Miranda?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that was all handled ahead of time, and it was dealt with via verbal understanding as well as following up with email so that everybody knew what because I specifically said in an email, I've done the review and I authorize Miranda to sign on my behalf. Yep.
Great.
Yep.
To be clear. Any other questions or comments for Herb on this update? Go ahead, Marcia.
Could we just have those copies of those authorizations with the warrant? Because we're kind of left wondering, was this official? Yeah,
well, I just indicated that it's part of the record that it was printed out by Becky and included in with but each time there's an AP warrant or a payroll, there's a folder that's created that's maintained in her vault that's would be reviewed by any audit from that standpoint should they use that as a sample for that audit. So that documentation is already included in the prospective accounting documents.
I appreciate that, but I think that before we can feel comfortable doing something official.
Oh, I'm
we-
sorry.
we-
You got, yes, 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 no problem. Yep, sorry.
Any other questions? Go ahead, Claudette.
Herb, this, I think you said his name is John.
John Casey, yes.
Is he full-time and will he be in the office?
He's in the office for every hour that he's here, which is nice compared to Seth. He's picking up where Seth left off, which is 20 hours a week, because that's essentially what you authorized me for under the original contract with Seth, to get us at least through June. And then that the idea is when we get into a new fiscal year, if there's opportunity and he is good for the position, to either elevate him to 40 hours or to continuing as a temp, or to hire him into the position as finance director. But at this point, this is simply a continuation of Seth's contract at 20 hours a week through the fiscal year.
And what's his background?
His background, he has some background in finance. He does not have governmental background, but he has a little bit more of so to speak, the higher level type of stuff. He is an individual that's applied for the finance director position in the past. He has not made it through the hurdles from that standpoint, but being offered through the temp agency, it seemed like a good opportunity to continue what Seth had started, and without having, liability to the town per se, to have the ability to see the individual at work with the possibility that he might be successful for the future, but there's no guarantees on that whatsoever. And if you want, I can share his resume with you folks.
Yes, please.
Okay.
I think Herb, like at one point in the town manager's report, maybe soon, maybe in April, right? You had suggested that before the end of the fiscal year, it was your goal to have a finance director in place.
Yep.
Is that still a goal?
I would love to have somebody last Tuesday as the finance director. I don't know if by July 1 that we'll have a finance director on staff. Keeping in mind during the 5th advertising, we had 3 very eligible candidates to do this, and I offered it to the 3 individuals, and each of the 3 denied it. We then decided to hold off a little bit on the advertising, go with a temp, which brought Seth on board, with a continuation of John Casey that continues that standpoint. I've just finished receiving applications for the 6th advertisement for the finance director. I have to look at those candidates. I'm pessimistic at best because it's a small candidate pool. Miranda's indicated at least the ones that she's looked at don't seem to be from her perspective, qualified for the particular position. So I'm pessimistic about July 1st. If John Casey pans out, which I'm hoping, then it's an easy yes, but I'm not there yet because his first day was today.
Okay, I'm gonna ask a question of board members, and we don't have to answer it. Forgive me if it's not something you would like to answer. But in the spirit of sort of Peter Orner talking about accountability, what do board members see as our accountability in this finance office position and sort of general situation going forward? Do we go ahead, Marsha? You have an answer.
Can I interject for a second, Roger?
Please.
There still is the other opportunity that so far that I mentioned to the board that we haven't not capitalized on, but used at that point, is to outsource. And at one point, I had recommended the possibility of outsourcing to Bonnie Batchelder before we got involved in doing the next audit, where she would step away from our audit, but she would step in as a outsourced contractor to do, for instance, 20 hours a week to do the high level stuff that we have. To me, that's still a potential possibility, but we would have to shift. I don't think We may not be able to do that at this point since we've already engaged Bonnie for this particular audit. But once the audit's complete, that would take us out of a contractual obligation. But there are other firms that are out there that probably could do that.
I guess my question, which Marcia had her hand up, how we know that personnel is, you know, in your duties, but I think I think I speak for all of us when we're very concerned about this sort of anytime sort of a new situation that requires extensive explanation from the finance office comes up, we really yearn for more stability, or to have the full hires, I would rather say, to have full staffing, the stability that comes with full staffing. And so we just we defer to you on that. And yeah. my question of the board, which may be inappropriate, is how much longer should we? or what can we do further? So go ahead, Marcia has her hand up. I ask that in the spirit of having a conversation, not being antagonistic. Go ahead, Marcia.
Well, I think it goes to the heart of our fiduciary duty to the town. And I think that we, you know, we have to have those positions filled. And I think, and I understand if we're having difficulty finding people to apply, but I do think it's key. And I also think that having a finance committee is probably key. Mm-hmm. And without either of those, I feel like we don't have the necessary guardrails in place, because, you know, good governance is checks and balances.
And I know, Herb, you've been working on, to the point about checks and balances, you've been working on internal procedures and have asked our town treasurer to be in on that process. Can you talk a little bit about the financial procedures and how that is developing?
Sure. On the accounts receivable side of stuff, I've offered a list of account receivable type stuff to Cheryl to see if she would like to participate in the process and offer some stuff. So that information still remains out there, because I think it's important in the general scope of things. Generally, you know, I'm accounts payable side of stuff. The treasurer typically is accounts receivable side. So what I'm trying to do is to sort of start that delineation. And I think it's important for Cheryl to be involved in that process. That's why I've asked her for some assistance on that account receivable protocol side of things. With regard to on the accounts payable side, there are policies that you folks have agreed to deal with. There are some policies that I'm working on. Seth had started some of the input in terms of that. I've started talking about that with John today, and I have some of the drafts of those types of things that are moving on. As a for instance, and I'm continuing to work on the actual internal protocols to get things written up, but necessarily it's going slowly because I'm spending most of my time just putting out campfires rather than being able to be a true town manager. And I can't, I mean, stating the obvious is not too helpful. And I think that their board members have been involved in this particular process of filling the holes in the finance director type position. I'm trying, Seth, I think, did a great first job, but by getting a full-time job elsewhere, that, you know, immediately things come to a screeching halt. So I am working on things. Again, product is my intention for each month when we get to financial reports to have some additional product to you folks. I didn't have any this time because of the 2 weeks that I was away for my personal reasons, but also because Seth left just like 2 weeks before that.
Okay, Claudette, did you have a comment?
Yep, there are other towns that utilize their treasurer much more than we do. In fact, their treasurer in some towns is the finance officer, and there's a accounts payable clerk or whatever, assistant. I just question whether or not we get to July 1, if we want to enter into some discussion with our treasurer about filling in more readily. But because I agree that we can't keep going on like we're going on. That's all yeah.
And that's fine with me. If Cheryl wants to come in on a regular basis and help with day-to-day type stuff, and it's not just a periodic type stuff, it's got to be on a regular basis for an interim period, I have no problem with that.
So, I do, I think there's I think this is, I think we definitely, so are we continuing to go ahead, Claudette. I'm trying to sort of sum up a next step, but maybe you can help.
I guess what I really want to say is there needs to be some oversight in that office that's currently lacking.
Well, I would just add that, go ahead, Marcia, did you have a point?
I agree. I think I was just looking to see if there was anything statutorily that would say that she couldn't serve that purpose, but Claudette says other towns are doing it and I haven't seen anything. And I just think, why wait? Maybe we should just go forward, because how many weeks has this gone on?
A year and a half.
Well, perhaps we should see the writing on the wall and just engage in conversation sooner rather than later.
And I think so. I think too, I think our current, I don't think this conversation is a commentary at all on what the board necessarily perceives to be our the capabilities of our current staffing, right? Like but we get the sense that there needs to be, as you, Herb, have mentioned, a second person. And so I think we've tried 6 different searches to find a second person. The board has authorized an increase in salary, right? We've appreciated and sort of appreciated sort of the stopgaps you've put into place for consultants, but it just I don't know. I think we need to figure out something longer term, and that's just what it is. And I don't know what that should look like at this point. And so perhaps we can continue the conversation, and maybe there's like a recommendation that we might be able to see. I don't know. I'm just articulating a frustration, which is not helpful, perhaps.
Maybe you could hire somebody like Municipal Resources, Inc., which is essentially a recruiting firm, and let them do the job for you and me. It'll cost some money, but maybe they have a different way of advertising this for this particular position that would make it more attractive. And you could give them a level of latitude in terms of salary and perhaps benefits. Granted, that will, may tick off some other department heads, but for the sake of, creating fiscal stability in this particular town, that may be another way to deal with it. So that, one, it's not me doing the recruiting process, it's a professional firm. And that doesn't address the immediacy, but maybe it's another alternative to look at for, again, a different way to try to get that oversight in there.
Right, because I think this update from you that we have heard is a continuation essentially of the previous model, right? Like it sounds, and this person offers is unique in the sense that they're local, right? They may be open to possibly becoming an A-line position with us, but outside of the unique characteristics of this actual person fulfilling the job, it's just a continuation, right, of the previous staffing.
Correct.
And I know that you have said that your goal was to sort of have that A-line staffer in place by July, by the end of the fiscal year. So knowing and hearing that that is not likely, what next?
Yeah.
And so if there's a recommendation potentially forthcoming about, you know, needing board support for money for a recruitment firm, if that's the recommendation that we might be hearing, then we need to learn of that.
Yeah, I'm running out of, you know, so to speak, I'm running out of ideas, and you know, you guys look to me constantly for recommendations from that standpoint. I'm running out of, you know,
Yeah.
HR solutions. You guys have been supportive of me through the process with regard to trying to up the budget, allowing, you know, bulk time arrangements with Nemrick, allowing a temporary agency to deal with stuff. Potentially, you put Cheryl into some of the position, but still, I don't think that gives you, you know, ultimately, it hasn't given us what we're looking for from that standpoint. So you know, you either continue a model which doesn't seem to be working, you outsource something, you hire a recruiter with given some leeway, because I think that person's going to be able to talk to somebody and say, hey, you seem to be the person, what's the amount of money that gets you over here? Beyond that, it may be talking to a consultant to say what's the bandwidth that we need to be on in order to get somebody in here.
Okay. And so one last question, the procedures for accounts payable, accounts receivable. Have you or have you not heard back from Cheryl on that? I know that Cheryl's here, but have you heard any input from her on that?
I haven't heard back, but I haven't followed up since my original email, but there is a list that's out there that I'd love to have her input on, because I would like, before I draft something, I would like to have her input on stuff so that it's not just her responding to something that I put together.
Okay, and is there any board support needed, not so much in being part of that conversation, but maybe wondering if it could happen? And maybe from there we might learn more potentially for some of the things that Claudette and Marcia might be suggesting as a future conversation.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think what I should probably do is forward the email to you folks that I sent to Cheryl so you can see the list. And I think some of that has some possible suggestion in it where there could be that interface up to a point. I mean, it's not the panacea, but it might help with suggestion or review. Just
okay. Okay. Any other board member questions or comments? Go ahead, Marcia, and then Rob.
I just want to jump back to the tax delinquencies. I was kind of surprised at the duration of some. And so I'm wondering if we have some past history of, you know, a cutoff when do we put on a tax lien? Is there some mechanism that we invoke? Because I think after a certain point, you know, interest in things should be accruing and people should be, you know, notified that this is not going to happen.
Right. The board just updated its tax collection policy, which includes consideration for delinquent taxpayers, whatever it was, September or October this past year. We've started to engage in that process now that we've gotten past the delinquent taxpayer identification stage. Then we move into trying to contact them. And there are a number of individuals that we will likely have to move forward with toward tax sale. This town has done it in the past, but not recently. But with the updated policy, that's a better, I'll use the word reaffirmation that we need to do that, be more diligent in that particular process. And so that policy is very soon going to be very helpful. I will say, just as a sidebar, that at least one of our most egregious delinquent taxpayers has been pretty good recently of making some effort toward making tax payments. So that's very helpful. But there clearly are some others that are on the larger side as well that we just don't hear from that standpoint. And those are the kind of people that I'm targeting to go forward to see if we can't, scare up lien holders, property owners, what have you, to get some of these back taxes and delinquent taxes paid.
Thank you.
Rob, go ahead, and then Mary.
Is consideration of hiring a placement firm, headhunters, is that normally part of the town manager's purview? So, so we need to move forward on that as soon as possible, I think. And if there's added expenses involved, let us know as soon as possible.
Yeah, that's normal. Typically, you might have a budget or professional services to deal with it. This year, we've had an inordinate amount of professional services spent due to the open meeting law stuff, as well as the payment, the I can't remember if it was the second or the third payment for the repayment of the Church Street sidewalk stuff, but and then also the finishing up of the contract negotiations. But typically that's the line item where we would pull that from. So with regard to this fiscal year, I would be nervous about doing something that it goes beyond our budget without you folks understanding that the possibility of a deficit looms if we do something that's somewhat dramatic, for lack of a better term, in other words, expensive. But knowing that we do have a undesignated fund balance that would buffer that so if you ran a small deficit this year, the undesignated fund balance would cushion you in that, but nobody likes to run a deficit. So that's just the caution that I throw to the wind. But what I would do based on tonight's meeting is to go out and talk to at least Municipal Resources, Inc. and Vermont League of Cities and Towns to see what is a ballpark range of cost for headhunter, recruiter, whatever you call them nowadays.
Mary, you had your hand up, and then Marcia.
Yeah, I'd just be interested to hear after John Casey has had a chance to settle in, just to get a report from him, to meet him like we did with Seth.
Yep.
Just to get his sense of, is he getting the lay of the land?
Mhm.
And what can he do for us?
Yep. Again, today was his first day.
Exactly.
I spent about 3 hours talking to him. But yeah, yeah. If you could give me a little bit of a week or something on that, where I might be able to get him to settle in. But yeah, the idea is to have
it's
him
not to forget that, in a month or so, when he's had a chance to work with things a little bit and get used to things.
Yep.
Marcia, did you have a comment?
I was just going to say, do we have the money for it? And I'm looking at the town manager's report, and it looks like we have an unencumbered balance that's hefty for professional services, but maybe he knows that that's truly encumbered. But beyond that, I was kind of hoping that maybe we could have a conversation or authorize someone to have a conversation with Cheryl sort of soon to see if we could get some interim help and proceed with 2 lines so that we're not just waiting. And do we have money for that?
Was that a question for me, or
So
sorry?
so Marcia has a very specific question to have a conversation with our treasurer about what, Marcia?
About filling in for the moment in that position and just sort of getting us, because if it's been vacant for 1.5 years, I think that's a long time. And we need to sort of have a person there who's knowledgeable, and she's certainly knowledgeable. And then we can continue the search. But, we've given it a long time. But then that begs the question, do we have the money to pay for Cheryl's services.
Are there any other comments? I have one comment, but does anyone have any other comments? Mary or Rob or Claudette and Marcia have sort of weighed in on the specific point. Mary or Rob, do you have any points? My only point is that I would like to see evidence of other collaboration before I would vote on something more permanent. I don't know what kind of collaboration and conversations happening between our paid staff and our treasurer, and I would like I would like to move forward with that, with the knowledge that there's a good relationship, and so I would like an opportunity to I think that's why the financial procedures that we've been alluded to might be a good starting point if there's some willingness, but I don't know if that makes sense or if that is undermining the spirit of what Marcia and Claudette are advocating for. That's my only point. Is there a motion that you would like to make, Marcia?
I guess I would move that we investigate the possibility of retaining Cheryl Lindbergh to serve temporarily in the finance director position while simultaneously investigating other avenues for financial director search opportunities.
Is there a second?
I'll second it just so that we can have a discussion.
Okay, second made by Marcia, second by Claudette. Any further discussion? Go ahead, Claudette.
I think it's a little premature to make a motion and to vote on this motion at this time. I think there are lots of, I do believe there's friction between the finance office and the treasurer. And I would want to know what kind of reporting relationship would be there. And plus we just have not had any conversation with Cheryl to see if she's available or even willing to do this.
Right.
So I think it's premature at this point.
I'm willing to do it, just so you know. The only question I raise is putting her in a finance director role with her relationship as an elected official, as treasurer. I think that's contradictory in some instance, but I'm not trying to say that to undo it. What I'm just saying is I just want to be cautious about if we do that, we have to make sure the roles are delineated appropriately, because I don't want to undermine Cheryl as the treasurer in her elected position. That's what I'm concerned about.
And I believe Woodstock uses the model where the treasurer, the treasurer is the finance office, but it's not called the finance officer. The treasurer is still the treasurer, but has the overall responsibility for the workings of the finance office.
My thing is just make sure that we got the proper delineation so that we don't create an inherent conflict.
And I think my point about mentioning the procedures is we don't have procedures that sort of define the two-step process or formalize sort of the relationship between the treasurer and the office. And so I would maybe like to see that before we then turn the whole thing on its head. That's all. That's all. Any further discussion? So I think I think there's a sense of needing to know sort of next step, or we want a technical fix, or a sort of knowing, leaving sort of this conversation knowing that there's going to be a follow-up of something. So it sounds like Herb may look to investigate some recruitment options for us, and maybe not make a recommendation, but just to maybe let us know what information kicks up. Is that, am I hearing that that is something we would be interested in learning about or knowing about?
So do we have a motion though on the
We have a
table?
motion, yeah.
We do. Okay.
Okay.
So
Do that.
was there a friend, would we like to vote on that? Would we like to call the question, or would we like to do something else with that? Thank you, Mary, for that
Let's
reminder.
call a question.
Or
Okay.
do you want to withdraw it?
That'd be
Marcia,
okay.
would you like to withdraw your motion?
On the understanding that there will be an investigation of other opportunities, I would like to withdraw my motion.
Okay.
And I withdraw my second.
Excellent. Okay. So now we're having just a, go ahead, Claudette.
But I would like to, as well as the looking for information about recruitment, if the chair would have a conversation with the treasurer.
Okay.
Investigating the possibility of another option should we need to go forward with another option. Does that make sense?
Not quite.
So if the recruitment piece doesn't work,
Mhm.
or it's going to take 6 months, if that's like, or if I just would like to have another option on the table if it's going to take us 6 months to get the recruiting piece up and running. Does that make sense?
A little bit. It seems similar to a motion that was withdrawn. Go ahead, Marcia, your point.
It seems similar. I would like to have a limit. I mean, time slips away. So I would like to say, you know, I don't know, maybe 3 months is the limit.
So you would like, so there's an, so I'm hearing that there's an interest in like having Herb or supporting Herb in finding sort of a recruitment firm for our finance director, finding more information about that, and a suggestion that we should recommend or want that to be a small time window. Is that what I'm hearing? Or is that not right? Go ahead, Marcia.
Well, I'm just concerned. I don't want to hear later that we've committed to $100,000 headhunt. I don't think, I mean, again, we don't have the money for that. So if an inquiry is not going to hurt anything, if we can just find out how much this would cost. But I'm also wondering, I presume Herb's already done this if it's possible, but maybe VLTC helps find these folks, or, you know, I don't know, we must have collaborative sources.
Yeah, MRI is a normal, is a big group, Municipal Resources Inc. out of Meredith, New Hampshire, and Plymouth. VLCT does this. What I'm trying to do, what I want to do is contact VLCT, but I'm thinking a little bit higher up. I'm thinking through sort of like maybe even higher than MRI in terms, if we can do this, because I don't want to just continue. I don't want to do something that sounds good and then we just end up having have you ask the same questions of me and I give you the same answer and you're totally dissatisfied with me. Trust me, I'm as worn out on this as all of you are. And I can't function fully as a town manager, you know, as you well know, to kick the dead horse without having this kind of position. So I'm thinking if I can figure out what some of these higher costs are, MRI, I'm sure will provide us something, and I know them well enough that they might be able to provide the name of a couple other firms. Same thing with Robert Half, the temp agency. The Robert Half is the executive temp portion, the higher up than the accounts temp that we used for Becky. So I'm hoping that at least those contacts can give me a couple tentacles of additional contacts for some real sort of finance level recruiting groups.
So I think, so we definitely are interested in getting more information and knowing sort of what authorities will be consulted. We would appreciate that. But I think Marcia, Marcia's point, I think, just to restate it, is what are the sort of parameters or the guardrails around that a little bit. So we don't want to leave this saying like, okay, we're going to look into that. And then, so I think maybe it's a matter of future agenda setting. Do we think that maybe, to your point, maybe in a month, right? Because that was the original goal, was to have someone in place. Maybe in a month, we'll have, we could sort of ask that at a future agenda, just sort of what the update is. Maybe the first meeting in July. Is that enough time, you think, to kick up some information and get some more?
I think just finding recruiting type stuff shouldn't take more than getting, at least not for the packet, but having a couple days between now and June 9th. Maybe I could give you an update on June 9th verbally, but written stuff maybe by the end of June, meaning your second meeting in June. I'm hoping that MRI would be able to, through a phone call, could just give me some insight right away that I can share with you folks to at least give you what the ballpark of cost would be.
Okay, yeah, I think we want that. And so it sounds like you'll begin that process, and maybe by sounds like the second meeting in June or maybe the first meeting in July will be positioned to potentially act with that information. Is that right? Is that what I'm hearing? Yeah, Herb, is that what I'm hearing?
Sorry, yes. Yeah. And July represents a new fiscal year, so I'm not saying that just gives you a whole new opportunity, but I like between now and the end of June, I am a little bit nervous about, expenditure that doesn't currently lie in the budget. But once we get to July, you are talking about a new budget. Professional services is a whole new ball game from that standpoint. The between now and the end of the year is really what we are going to end up spending budget wise, and what you have for a cushion for the undesignated fund balance, should you choose to spend some money before the end of this fiscal year. When we get into the new fiscal year, again, it's a little bit of a new ball game there.
Okay, did that address a little bit of what you were articulating, Marcia? Or okay,
Sounds good.
there. Okay, anybody else have any questions or about this agenda item? Okay, so I appreciate sort of the slightly meandering path that we took with that, Herb. Like the agenda item was for a report from you, which we heard, but I think I think now that we've sort of had the consultant filled, right, and there's that stopgap is now fixed, which we appreciate. I think we do need to start thinking about, yes, the next sort of big move to get this finance director in place. So sounds like we have something. Okay. Anything else for anyone on this? Is there a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Is there a second? Seconded by Rob, made by Mary. All in favor, please raise your hand. Or okay. Thank you. An hour over, but time well spent, I hope. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.